Good evening and welcome to The Journey Home. I'm Marcus Daly, your host for this program. Knowing and loving and serving the Lord Jesus are a great blessing and a gift of grace. And those that have been allowed to know, to love, and to serve our Lord have also been challenged to follow Him wherever He calls. And sometimes that's a challenge. And sometimes that means discovering the beauty of His church that He established in His apostles. And for some of us, that was what we never expected in our life. For others, that was what they were running away from. But by the mercy of God, their hearts and minds were open again to the beauty of that. And that's sometimes the stories you hear on the journey home. So thank you for joining us tonight. Our guest tonight is Marcus Daly. It's not often that I have a guest with the exact same first name. He's a revert to the church. Marcus, it's wonderful to have you on the journey home.
Thank you, Marcus.
It's good to have you here all the way from the far west coast.
That's right, from Vashon Island, so even a little west of the west coast.
So, yeah, how far west? Are you as far west as other than Alaska as you get?
No, because really the island is in the Puget Sound, so it's not off in the Pacific Ocean. So we're kind of ensconced in the Sound. It's just about a 25-minute ferry ride west of Seattle, or 10 or 15 minutes north of Tacoma. The island kind of stretches between those two cities. So it's accessible by boat only.
So is there a time of the year when you're locked out there and you can't get into the land?
No, the maritime climate means that it doesn't get, I like to say Seattle is neither hot nor cold.
It's lukewarm. Now, in the Revelations, the Lord will do a hobby, but...
Right. I want my children sometimes, let's go someplace really cold or someplace really hot. You have to know some extremes in life. So yeah, but got to get up early to catch that boat and hope that it runs so you can make it to be with you.
Or own your own boat. There's the other
Yeah,
option.
there probably are a few people who do that, but it's not an island that lends itself to conspicuous consumption. So I don't know if anybody actually commutes by boat. Everybody keeps a kind of low profile, very
really?
Rural island with
Is that right?
Yeah, a lot of small farms and things. It's very sparsely populated. The island itself is bigger than Manhattan, but there's 11,000 people on it at its biggest in the summertime and about 8,000 the rest of the year.
So you're not allowed to tell anybody about this island?
Yeah.
You're letting the word out and everybody's going to come.
It's all right. If audience members want to come to Vashon Island, we'd love to have them. Join us at St. John Vianney there.
Oh, that sounds great. Well, maybe we'll get to talk about the island a little bit later. That's neat. That's neat. You have that gift of living out there with your family.
It's a huge blessing, yeah.
All right, well, let me get out of the way and invite you to begin way back at the beginning and help the audience know a little bit about your spiritual journey.
Okay, well, so I didn't grow up out west. I grew up on the East Coast. I'm from Philadelphia. I was born in Philadelphia and baptized there as an infant. And my family moved out to the suburbs when I was still a baby. I have one older brother. So my mother, my father, my brother, and I moved out to what I kind of remember as the mansion on the hill. It was a big old farmhouse in a town called Wayne. And
you were Catholic?
Yeah, I was Catholic, so I was baptized in the faith, and then we moved out to Wayne, and we joined Our Lady of the Assumption parish out there, which was an Italian national parish, and everybody there was a cousin, their uncles and things, except for us and maybe a couple of other families, so kind of stuck out. But it was a beautiful town that I grew up in, but initially that's where we lived, and my father unfortunately struggled with the curse of the Irish, and so we sort of suffered under that a little bit, and things were discordant in my home when I was a youngster, and as a result of that, I think probably, and the fact that the Vietnam War was always on the news, I had sort of an anxious childhood, and discovered early on that laughter meant that people weren't as mad maybe as if people weren't laughing, so I think I kind of overdeveloped my wit at an early age as a defense mechanism. They say the best defense is a good offense, and I think I was pretty offensive as a as a small child. Well, maybe not that small, but yeah, as growing up. But so 1976, as Philadelphia jubilantly celebrated the bicentennial of this country, my parents went their separate ways, and my mother took us and we moved in with my grandmother and got a different house in the same area, and my father moved into an apartment nearby. And my mom raised us as a secretary. She went back to work, got a job as a secretary, and somehow or another kept food on the table, and with my grandmother's help too. It was a good childhood, actually, because in a lot of ways, that lack of my father, the lack of the discord that existed in my house, there was peace, even though he was absent.
It was a flawed peace, but it was peace.
Right, and my mom did a great job of keeping us plugged into my father's side of the family. So I knew my grandparents and I knew his brothers, and they were a big part of my life too. And we visited with my father once a month or so, and those were interesting visits a lot of the time. So my brother and I had a colorful childhood in some ways because of that.
Had you been active in the church during that whole time? Or?
Yeah, so my mother was very dutiful about our faith life. We went to Mass every Sunday. I played ice hockey as a kid, and so I don't know if you know any hockey players, but it was usually games at like 6:30 in the morning, Saturday and Sunday mornings, and they could be 2 hours away. So sometimes I would go to Mass with my stockings on and my shin guards, but we did not miss Mass. So we went every Sunday, Holy Days of Obligation, confession once a year. We didn't have a profound faith life in our home. It was doing what we were supposed to do. And my mother was very busy, taking care of us and working and everything like that. My father, to his great credit, when in 1979, when Pope John Paul II came to Philadelphia on his first apostolic visit to the United States, my father loaded me and my brother up on the train and took us down to Philadelphia. So we attended Mass there with 997,997 or so of our closest friends. I don't really remember the facial expressions of the Holy Father at that point because we were pretty far back, but it was a beautiful thing to see everybody just coming together for the faith,
Yeah.
So at Our Lady of the Assumption, I was, it was the late 70s and early 80s, so the catechesis was not necessarily everything that it could be, and hopefully is getting to be now. The thing I remember most about Our Lady of the Assumption was the Our Lady of the Assumption annual carnival, where the parking lot would get the salt and pepper shaker and throw darts at balloons to win the Dallas Cowboys cheerleader poster to hang in your room or something like that. So that was a little bit warped, I guess, looking back on things. And also being it's such a close-knit community of Italian families. We were a little bit of outsiders that way. But somehow or another, our little parish scored the altar that Pope John Paul II had said Mass on when he made his apostolic visit to Philadelphia.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know how that happened. Although, the mayor of Philadelphia at the time was Frank Rizzo, who was sort of a notorious personality, very much enmeshed in the Italian community. And I'm wondering if the Italian National Parish and Mayor Frank Rizzo somehow funneled that gift to our parish. So despite the fact that we had a second-class relic, I guess, right there, still the pull of the world and the culture and everything was stronger in some ways than my faith. And I think a lot of it was probably just seemingly benign stuff like the music that I was listening to and things. I can remember buying a Walkman when I was 12 years old. My friend Scott and we raked leaves on this neighborhood yard for weekend after weekend. Finally, we were paid $50 each. I was 12 years old. We went right down to the King of Prussia Mall and we bought 2 brand new Sony Walkman. And I could afford like 1 cassette tape after that. I think it was the Who's Next. So there I was now in my own little universe with the Walkman on, cutting grass in the neighborhood and things like that. Yeah. And those soundtracks were much more prevalent in my setting the tone of my life than the rhythms of our faith. So I think at confirmation, I think I was kind of one of those people who didn't stop going to Mass afterwards, but sort of graduated from the faith internally, if not externally. I can remember CCD, we no longer had to attend CCD on Sundays because we were mature now, so we would have CCD on Monday evenings. And I remember my mother would take me and a friend and drop us off, and we would walk towards the building, wave goodbye, thanks Mom, walk towards the building where CCD would take place, and then as she would round the corner, we would about face and head over to Dunkin' Donuts for an hour and a half. And when I'm letting myself off the hook too easily, I think maybe what I got at Dunkin' Donuts for an hour and a half was a little less sickeningly sweet than what I was getting at Jesus Loves You, Draw a Flower, as I was developing into a young person, a young adult. But I think I'm being a little bit too easy on myself when I say that. So as I moved into my teenage years, what I was listening to, the soundtrack, that's how I think of it, was girls, this world. I was also pretty materialistic from a young age. I think I was seeking happiness in stuff.
Yeah.
And so that was where my heart was, unfortunately. And as I got a little bit older and I got a driver's license, I started to say, well, I'll go to Mass later, and the family would go to Mass, my mother would go to Mass, and I would take the car. And with my freedom, I would, again, bypass where I was supposed to be going and instead go to a convenience store and buy a Pepsi and a Snickers bar and go sit in Valley Forge Park. I'm so free. Eat my Snickers bar and drink my Pepsi and listen to classic rock on the radio.
So, sounds like your new sacrament of your freedom.
Right. Talk about impoverished. So, in high school, my main focus was on getting to know the young women around me, and I took that off with me, I'd say, I wasn't a great student. I was kind of a class clown. Mm-hmm. And despite that, I was accepted to a highly ranked school. I went to the #1 party school in the nation at the time. I don't know how many #1 party schools there are at any given time.
I think every state claims at least one.
Right. So I went off to West Virginia University.
Okay.
And again, I was already kind of on the track of pleasure seeking and just finding my happiness in this world. I still attended Mass fairly regularly. It's sad to look back on. I was probably the most spiritual person of my friends. Me and one guy who was a member of the Reformed Church of Jesus Christ and Latter-day Saints. Okay. And we would spar theologically in that, we both kind of knew how to pronounce Jesus. I think that was about the depth of it. I didn't know how much time was wasted with our deep thoughts, but still we like to argue, I guess. So at college, after a dissipated week and a foolish weekend, some little grounding was still available to me, I guess, at the 9:00 Mass. Colleges bend over backwards to make it convenient for people to please be able to attend. We'll have it at 9:00 at night when there's really nothing else to do on a Sunday night. So I would go to Mass then, and most weekends. And I remember I would go around and invite my Catholic friends, do you want to go? And every week it would be, Sunday, right? Shoot, next week, man, next week. Sorry about that, just let me know next week. And the next week come along and they'd be in their flip-flops eating sub sandwiches again at 9:00. So probably took a little bit of pride in that too, is at the same time that I was going, and I was getting real consolation in Mass. I think pretty early on I realized I shouldn't be receiving communion because something was awry, and somehow I did not think, well, there's a confessional in the back. Maybe if you went in there, then you could fully come in here, and maybe that would order your life a little bit better. But yeah, it's my fault, but that was my stupidity then.
Just an audience, our guest is Marcus Daly. And where was Jesus in all that time? Where do you think? You could pronounce his name in your battle with the Mormon, and you had the externals of the faith growing up. What would you think about him? Do you talk to him? Anything there you think during all that time?
Yeah, he was right there, and yet the stuff that my heart was filled with was just had me not recognizing him. It's amazing how close he was and how far I was. How's that possible? Yeah, I don't think I'd ever really developed a prayer life. I knelt down by the side of my bed and I asked God to bless my family members, and it was dutiful, and that was it. And so I'm sure I said, God help me for all the stupid trouble I was getting myself in, and then didn't get as bad as I thought it would get, and so back I went. It's hard to know how.
Yeah, I mean, he was there.
Yeah,
he just wasn't.
Yeah, I
here.
He wasn't right.
Yeah.
I felt such a life raft at Mass on those Sunday evenings. And yet I couldn't see how that, I didn't, I chose not to stretch that out into, this is reality. This is, other stuff is just illusory. Instead, I went back to the illusions. And I don't know, maybe I had a desire to kind of make life more absurd because I couldn't quite reconcile everything. So I knew things, this is looking back, things either have to all make sense or nothing makes sense. And so I think I was drawn to, since I didn't want maybe everything to make sense because that would ask something of me, I'll try to perpetuate the absurdity of my existence. I wasn't profound in it or anything like that, but maybe that's what was going on. I went through school. I had about 6 credits to go, and I got a good job in that a friend of mine was able to hook me up with a job where I made like $1,000 a week. And I was like, wow, to my mind, education was all about getting a good job and then being able to make good money. Because also my desires were all material. And so I ended up just staying on that job for a year and not going back to school. And I thought I had everything I needed. I had enough money to buy beer for me and my friends. So yeah, everything's taken care of. And music, so I could listen to, keep the soundtrack going. I did that job for about a year. It was in downtown Philadelphia, and eating cheesesteaks every day for lunch and walking around and feeling like I was probably not worthy of my pay gnawed at me somehow. And I decided I wanted to kind of live the antithesis of this life. I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go out to Montana and I'm going to become a wildlife biologist. And I'm going to save the world. Because that was another thing. I was going to Philadelphia and I was just thinking, wow, how this world can't sustain us. Look at all the people and all the consumption, and look at all my consumption. I was 23 years old. My cholesterol level was through the roof. So I was projecting all that on the world was somehow not able to sustain them, but I couldn't have sustained me. So I went out to Montana and enrolled in school to become a wildlife biologist. Well, I still needed to know math and science. I'd been an English major before. So my dreams of being a wildlife biologist were quickly dashed after I got past here's basic math that you need before you study biochemistry or something like that. So I fell back on English and studied that there. And I started writing a column for the school paper out there. I also really wanted to be kind of part of an intellectual set, I think. I felt like I had been kind of a rube, and I knew there was something more, and I thought I'd find it in the mind. I'd go and hang out with smart people. And so I had this job, or I went to school and I was writing this column, and it was just gobbledygook, but people loved it, so it was painful. God have mercy on me for that. But I got in with kind of the writers at the school paper and everything, and I got a taste of the objectivity of journalism, even at that level, and realized there's really no such thing as objectivity as in what people are sharing with us and what people are passing on to us. Again, I think
though they want to claim they're being objective,
yeah,
but
how's it possible?
Human beings always have the subjective part, whether they see it or not.
Right, and one of the most amazing things was amidst the professors and the students, how uniform their subjectivity seemed to be as far as the message that they wanted to get out, who was right and who was wrong. But again, I was in Montana, mountains all around, lots of bars. I still had money. There was enough there to just keep me moving in the direction of absurdity. I think a lot of people kind of want to escape the traditions of their families, if not of their church, go out west and create a new meaning as they see it. And so, I did that. I enjoyed, along the way, one thing I should say is I made so many great friends despite my foolishness. And when hearts speak to heart, even amidst foolishness, you see truth. And so you can, if you're attentive, you can never really be pulled that far away from God because his image is all around us, even when it's flawed. So I did something very dangerous when I was 25. I had a friend who told me that, just for the heck of it, he had given up drinking for Lent. I said, no, that's an idea. Maybe I'll give up drinking for Lent. So that year I did, and for the first time in my life, in my adult life, I had a coherent thought that stretched longer than a week, that wasn't broken up by a weekend. And, sometimes you start wrestling with things, and then you blow off steam, you release the pressure or whatever, and you're back to square one. And, you start the thoughts anew. But when you build and you have that sort of consistency, I started to look at myself a little bit, and I thought, what am I doing? I'm out here in Montana, 25, still going to school. But Lent ended, and I celebrated. But those seeds, that inkling that maybe I was wasting my time, was there. And so over the next couple of years, unfortunately, that would recur. And beer didn't taste as good to me as it had once had. And fun wasn't as fun as it once had been. And I started to get, very sorrowful, sad, maybe depressed. My family was concerned about me because my personality changed a lot, because I was disillusioned with the life I had been living. And I started to, when I was initially in Montana, I wasn't going to church at all, but I started to go down the street and find some consolation again, just sitting in the back of the church when there's no mass going on, there's nobody there. And I couldn't bridge the gap between who I was, who I'd been, and what was there, who was there, and how to come back. It sounds so pathetic in a way for a cradle Catholic to not know that there's really very practical steps you can take to amend your life. But I wasn't satisfied by material stuff anymore either. In fact, I ended up getting rid of my car, my furniture, and sleeping on my floor, and just, it was almost like I was trying to impose a penance on myself or something. Just, who am I to live this life? I just wanted to get rid of a lot of the distractions that I knew had been in the way of something. I started working as a commercial fisherman in Alaska because I had a desire to do something real. I wanted to work, I wanted to feel work, I wanted to have a tangible relationship between what I was doing and what I was receiving for what I did. It's very straightforward. You receive a share of the catch, what you're paid for the catch, and I like that. And I also like the challenge and the beauty. And so I was working seasonally as a commercial fisherman, and I had a friend who, she was getting ready to go to medical school, and she said to me, I'm going to go to the Middle East this summer. That's what I want to do before I go to medical school. Do you want to come to the Middle East with me? And I said, okay. I have enough money. And she wanted to go as just kind of a cultural adventure. She had been born and baptized Catholic also, but something she wanted to do. And she was pretty, and we went, and we were friends. And her mom asked me, are you her guardian angel? When I was going to go, because she was very worried about her daughter going to the Middle East. And I said, maybe. Would I know? I didn't even know, but that was good enough for her. She said, okay, well, that's not a no. He's not a guardian angel. I have a better understanding of who the guardian angels are now than I did then. But so I went along just to kind of tag along and go on a cultural, let's see another culture and spend a couple of months in the Middle East. Well, you can't go to the Middle East without bumping into salvation history. Yeah. And so God took my bumbling adventure and turned it into a pilgrimage. And among other things, there were a few things that really stood out for me. One thing is, we were in Turkey, we went to Antioch, and there's this little cave, and my friend got sick, so she needed to be in bed in the hotel for a couple of days, and I just kept going back to this little cave that was the first cathedral. It was where St. Peter and St. Paul were there, and I just remember kneeling in there and praying and asking God for help, because I was still feeling this discord between how I lived and that there must be something more. So just crying out for help. And I was being worked on a natural level and a supernatural level on that trip, because naturally we didn't speak the language. We were completely at the mercy of the people around us, and we were uncomfortable and trying to do it on a tight budget. And it's beautiful, and it's desert, and the skies were so big and the stars were so numerous, and I felt my smallness so acutely during that trip. But also people were so good. People helped us out. And despite language barriers, I can remember thinking, it's taking me 10 minutes to talk about the weather with somebody, just to say it's a nice day. But I really get it. Like, it is a nice day. Yeah, it really is a nice day. Like, for all the hours I spent talking about things that seemed like so much more grand, just, yeah, it's a nice day. Like, I would think about that 10 minutes. We got there. We understand each other. So the Antioch, we went to where Moses died, looking out on the promised land where he couldn't cross in. And we went to Jerusalem. And Cradle Catholic, I didn't say, I should at least see this when I'm in Jerusalem. I didn't say anything like that. I just went, okay, let's go to Jerusalem. And I kind of was following her lead a little bit, because she had things that she wanted to do. And there, I remember walking around Jerusalem, and this kind of small throng came by me, and I kind of got swept into it. And they suddenly knelt, so I knelt. And then there was somebody in a robe speaking in Italian for a little while. And then they all stood up and walked, so I stood up and walked. And then they all knelt and spoke something in Italian. And I realized, I'm on the way of the cross. I'm on the Via Dolorosa. I wouldn't have even known Via Dolorosa at that time. But along I got swept all the way to the Holy Sepulchre, and put my hand in the hole where the cross had been. And I would have never even said, this is something I ought to do. So my head was kind of reeling by the end of that trip of, this is all real. This stuff happened. Because I think growing up, I conflated my faith with science fiction. These are faraway names, faraway places, strange occurrences. Yeah. Where's the context for that? But then it hit me there. Like, this all happened. And so I was kind of stunned by the end of that trip, and quiet and confused in a good way. I was dazed a little bit. And I have an uncle who's a priest, and he had recommended to me, because he saw what was going on with me getting rid of my furniture and things. He said, when you come back from the Middle East, before you go back to the West Coast, you should check out this place in Combermere, Ontario, called Madonna House. I think you'll find it interesting.
We're going to pause there. Time for a break, because that is a neat recommendation of your uncle, isn't it? I mean, that's pretty nice. Let's pause there, Marcus, and we'll come back just a moment. We're with Marcus Daly, and he's just come back from the Holy Land, being worked on by God, and he's going to find out in a moment in which way. All right, we'll be back. Welcome back to the Journey Home. I'm Marcus Grodi, your host, and Marcus Daly is our guest. Marcus, I interrupted you right in the middle of your uncle's advice to go visit that wonderful place up in Canada.
Yeah, it was very gentle. Hey, you might want to check this out. And so I did. I came back from the Holy Land, and I had been with this friend for 7 weeks constantly. So I'd never spent that much time with a person, and I was watching out for, you don't leave a blue-eyed 22-year-old, 23-year-old girl in Cairo for very long by herself. You have a sense of, like, I need to stay close to her. And so we did, and we had a good friendship, and it's just, you spend that much time with a person and you really become connected in a way. And so we came back, we went to New York, and she went her separate way to head off to medical school, and I got on a bus and went up to Toronto to spend the night, and then catch a bus from there to Combermere, where Madonna House is located. And I probably got to Toronto about 5 o'clock, and I had my backpack, and I okay, I need to find a hostel for the night, someplace I'm going to stay. So I walked around. I remember I was walking around a neighborhood called Old Cabbage Town in Toronto, and it was probably even later, maybe 7 o'clock or so, and it was getting dusky, and I couldn't find a hostel. And I was walking down the neighborhood street, and somebody had a little sidewalk sale going on, and they had some books, and I picked up the books, and there was one anthology of poetry, of North American poetry. I guess it wouldn't be American poetry because it was Canada also. So for 50 cents or something, I bought that. I'll read this wherever I spend the night. And so I found, I guess a hostel in Canada is actually a halfway house. So you have to be careful about how your terminology you use. But I found a place to stay, and it was very noisy and not the most comfortable place, but I settled in for the night, and then I had my anthology of poetry, and it's just me, just kind of twiddling my thumbs and looking at it. And I remember I opened it up to a poem by T.S. Eliot called The Hollow Men. And I read the first verse of The Hollow Men, which is this. We are the hollow men, we are the stuffed men, standing together, leaning together, headpiece filled with straw, alas. Our dried voices, when we whisper together, are quiet and meaningless as wind in dry grass or rat's feet over broken glass in our dry cellar. Shape without form, shade without color, paralyzed force, gesture without motion. Those who have crossed, with direct eyes, to death's other kingdom, remember us, if at all, not as lost, violent souls, but only as the hollow men, the stuffed men. And I realized, I'm a hollow man. I was supposed to read poetry for years in school, and I kind of faked my way through the essay question stuff. I think I get it.
But T.S. Eliot isn't always easy either.
No, it's not always easy. And interestingly, T.S. Eliot was the favorite poet of my traveling companion. She could recite the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock by heart, which I didn't understand. I'm like, oh yeah, it's deep. Yeah, I get that. But I got this poem. I got that I was hollow. I was empty. And it hit me so hard. That was probably the longest night of my life. I had spent all this time with this person on this adventure, and there I was by myself, and there wasn't much to be with when I was by myself. And it was kind of like, I got some sleep that night, not that much. Got up the next day to take the bus to Combermere, and in retrospect, it was kind of like a Holy Saturday. It was kind of like I was just bereft in, but there was also just a hint of anticipation at the same time. Like I felt abandoned, but not quite completely. And I got on the bus and I went to Combermere, and I was met by a man at there's no bus station, they drop you off on the side of the road, and a man met me in his pickup truck and he drove me back. And I got there in time for the evening liturgy, for the Mass. And walked through the woods to this amazingly beautiful little chapel in the woods with all this iconography around the walls. And I hadn't been exposed to the beauty of the Eastern Church until on that trip. We made a little side trip to Georgia, and a family took us in, and that's what all they wanted to show us was, because their churches were free again after all those years under communism. And I had this little preparation for that in Georgia, and then I went to Madonna House. I was like, oh, here it is again, this beauty. And we had the evening liturgy, and then we went back to their refectory to have the evening meal, and it was completely by chance August 15th. It was the Feast of the Assumption. And that's their day. That's also the birthday of the foundress. She had died, but they told me we don't eat like this every night, just so you know ahead of time. But I was back there at Madonna House, and I met people who within 10 minutes I had a relationship with, like I hadn't had relationships with people I had known for years, because they were alive with the love of Christ. And so I went from salvation, from the history of our faith, to the living reality of our faith, just like that. It was just this 1-2. And this, from then on, I saw beauty that I had never seen before. It was like I had glasses. Trees were beautiful in a way that they never had been before. Poetry and art was beautiful in a way it had never been before. And most of all, people were beautiful in a way they never had been before. So I only spent a little while there, but then I went back to Seattle and just kind of stumbled around for a little while almost. I just ended up hanging out with homeless people and taking them out for meals, just marveling at the incredible beauty of God through them. So it took me a little while to get my bearings after that. And where I lived in Seattle, there were 4 churches within walking distance. So you think of the Pacific Northwest as this very unchurched part of the country. But to me, I was like I was in Rome. I could walk to this church and I can walk to that church. So Seattle's a very Catholic city to me. And I didn't know anything about politics or allegiances or left, right. I just knew Mass, the Eucharist. I just want the Eucharist. I just want the Eucharist. And life just filled up for me in a way. And then after that, so I didn't have a background that said, oh, maybe should I talk to somebody about, I can remember talking to priests and just going around to people and saying, I get it. Yeah, let's do it. Let's be Catholic. Like even priests, I'd be like, this is wonderful. Let's live this faith. I'm here. I understand it. And some of them were just like, maybe you need some vitamins or something like that, just calm down a little bit. What are you talking about? But I just felt like I had been outside of something that everybody else understood. And it was only gradually that I understood like, well, this is a really huge gift that I have right now as far as just how much I feel God's love and his presence in my life. And there was a man at Madonna House who has since become a priest who said to me, he said, I'm going to pray that you meet a beautiful woman and you have a beautiful family. So I guess that was his way of saying, enjoy your visit, but this is not the place for you. And very shortly thereafter, I did. I met my wife in the most unexpected of places, and we now have 6 children. God willing, we'll be welcoming our 7th on the terra firma this Christmas. So it's just a life I never expected, and it's full, and it's a gift.
Had you had enough catechesis to supply the information for this new reality of the church, or did you have to fill in the gaps?
I'm still filling in the gaps. Yeah. This show was very helpful to me because when my wife and I were married, she was not Catholic. She understood that it was important to me. She agreed to raise our children that way, but she also, her father was a fallen away Catholic, is a fallen away Catholic. She's interesting because her grandmother is very Catholic, and she was a state senator in the state of Idaho who actually passed put the most pro-life legislation before the Idaho Senate that led now to call for a national boycott of Idaho potatoes if this thing went through, and it was vetoed by the governor, unfortunately. But she didn't have that faith growing up, and so I still didn't have the words. I had the love, I had the orientation, I had the understanding to just submit to God, but I couldn't explain it. And so it was really listening to Catholic radio when I stumbled upon that on the dial that started to give me a vocabulary to share that. And yeah, that's a lifelong pursuit now, is just to fill in those gaps, and also to see how to make it practical for my children too.
Yeah. What did you end up doing? I mean, you found the faith, growing in the faith.
Yeah.
You had a variety of jobs, and fishing in Alaska every once in a while.
Right. Yeah. So when I went back to Seattle, I thought that I saw a job listing. I read the paper. I had nothing else in my little shack to read, so I read the paper cover to cover. Eventually, I read the classifieds, and there was a help wanted ad for landscaping. I thought, well, hey, I'm so amazed by trees. I want to learn exactly how plants work. That'll be a way to get closer to the Creator right here in the city. So I started doing that, and then a couple months later, there's this beautiful girl sitting on the bumper of the pickup truck one morning, and I thought, well, that's nice. And we got to know each other in a month of just working together side by side, weeding and planting and things. And we ended up falling in love and getting married. And I wanted to use some of my love of the sea and the boats. And I had built an apartment with a friend in Seattle. And so I had a desire to do something real. When I was at Madonna House also, I split wood just all day, every day, except for when I was praying and when I was eating. And I just felt like, this is so honest. I'll eat and then I'll give my energy back to keep the place warm, and then I'll eat, and the food was just simple and honest. So from that point, I wanted to just learn a trade so I could support my wife and my family. So I learned boat building, and after we were expecting our second child, we decided to move out of the city to this island that I live on, and we thought we'd start a little company building simple wooden boats for people. And so that didn't really pan out because simple wooden boats still take a really long time to build, and not everybody wants to pay $15,000 for a 12-foot boat. So we fell back on landscaping and did that for a while. And then in 2005, Pope John Paul II died, and I was struck by his simple wooden coffin.
Yeah.
And it just was profound, especially amidst the backdrop of St. Peter's Square, to see just the face of the humility of our earthly existence, from this Pope who had traveled everywhere, who had been visited by everyone who was regarded so highly, but there he was, just teaching us once more with his funeral. And so that was kind of percolating inside me while I was landscaping. And in 2009, I said to Kelly, I forgot about Pope John Paul II's casket. We were going to build simple wooden boats for people for little journeys. What if we built a different kind of simple wooden vessel for a different kind of journey? And I was probably naive, but I was so it just made so much sense to me in so many ways that I thought I was just zealous for this idea of let's do this. And she agreed, and other people said, that's a great idea. And so we started doing that, and that was 5 years ago. And slowly we're generating awareness of that, and I've started carving prayers in the sides to kind of the context of the funeral. There's no better place to share our faith.
We have a video to show. This would be a good time, Marcus,
Yeah.
to show. So we're going to show a video about your work building caskets, right? You want to give an introduction to the video, or what?
But it's interesting how the video came about. I had a buddy who had a friend who was a filmmaker, and he was making a series of people who build stuff by hand in the Seattle area. And my friend said to me, he's interested. I told him about what you do. He's interested in making a video. Do you want to do it? And my first reaction was, I don't know. It's so close to me, and my faith is such a part of what I was doing. It was going to be his project, and I was going to really have any say in how it came out. So I was hesitant. But then I thought, I don't have to tell anybody if it's terrible. So I said, okay, sure. And that's
okay.
And he didn't share my faith or anything like that, but he said, I'll respect it. And he did.
All right. Well, let's take a moment and let's watch the video together.
The first coffin I ever built was for my child when my wife had a miscarriage. It took me a while to figure out how to make the panels wide and make them pretty. It's such a personal thing to have your hands on there and to really be working with it. Coffin making seems to have really begun with furniture makers. Metal is a pretty recent innovation, and apparently now we use enough metal every year in our coffins to rebuild the Golden Gate Bridge buried in the ground. To build an entire casket takes me about 25 hours. Mostly what I do is sand. I feel like I sand and I sand and I sand. I never feel like it's finished. But then I guess that's kind of a fit thing, because that's probably how we feel at the end of our lives too. I think one of the most important aspects of the coffin is that it can be carried. And I think we're meant to carry each other. And I think carrying someone you love and committing them is very important for us. And when we deal with death, we want to know that we have played a part and that we have shouldered our burden. So if we make it too convenient, then we're depriving ourselves of a chance to get stronger so that we can carry on. When I'm out here by myself early in the morning or in the middle of the night or something like that, I can get a sense of how work is love made visible. The Benedictine monks say, work and pray. And I guess those things kind of bleed together for me. So it's not that I have some words in my head. It's more just a state of love and becoming a small part of a bigger picture that I don't fully understand. I'm building something for someone that people tend to think is a destination. People think that the grave is the end. And I'm trying to illuminate that, no, it's a doorway.
Well, Marcus, that was quite an impressive presentation of your work, but it also, of course, emphasized that there's more to that than just building a box. I mean, many things in that were impressive to me, thoughtful, but the two things that jumped out is this one that addressing the issue of the way our culture is going with funerals, but through it being so flippant, we miss out on something that's there. And part of that was your reality of helping people see that it's a door. Death is a door.
Yeah. So even in the church, the cremation is becoming more and more common, and there's financial reasons that people choose that. But we're good in America. We're very sophisticated at separating people from their money. So cremation will find a way to be just as expensive as
of course,
burial. But we're losing the understanding, I think, of the sacramentality of the body. Death is uncanny. It's not. People are trying to say it's natural. It's just natural, but it's not. That's why we can't convince ourselves that it's natural. There's a separation that was not originally supposed to be, and an encounter with that uncanniness is a mystery, and it's an invitation to explore that. What is going on here? I mean, everybody, when they go to a funeral, we all bring both a sorrow for losing someone, but also a subjective dread about our own future. And so the more we can, as a church, contextualize through good funerals, contextualize our faith in that way. That's Christ came in, he conquered death.
Yeah.
So if we try to hide death, then we can't have the crisis that we need to see, is there a way out? And to ultimately be shown, yes, there's a way out. And so it seems that that's what we do by not doing the hard work of facing death, seeing death. We don't see through death. And I really believe strongly that our funerals, our Catholic tradition and the way we deal with it, and our funerals and everything from the vigil to the funeral to the committal, that is an opportunity to create a sacred space that will speak to people's hearts that are wanting to be spoken to in a way that they really aren't in the distractedness of everyday life.
I mean, to a certain extent, it would seem to me that historically the reason for cemeteries was a reminder of our intimacy with those who've gone before us.
Yeah. Yeah. When I had my conversion, my reversion, that was one of the things I felt more than anything is I was really drawn to spend my time in cemeteries. And also, I talked about when I was a child, I was very anxious. I saw catastrophes and calamities. I thought, it's going to be a hurricane, it's going to be an earthquake, there's going to be a nuclear war. One of the most striking things about my time after Madonna House was that I was no longer afraid of death. There's anxieties about things you left undone and things, but that fear, just that ongoing anxiety was gone. And so, cemeteries are, people wonder, what sort of landscaping should we put around the church? I think cemeteries are the ultimate landscaping for a church. We have that communion.
Well, certainly at one time that was the tradition.
Yeah. Let's remember that we are community, and we are the communion of saints. The body of Christ is not separated by the line between this earthly life and our death. It doesn't break that.
And we have an entire medical system, medical industry that's all about putting off death as much as possible, or not just delaying it, but isolating the person from that final experience full of tubes and drugs and in a strange environment.
Yeah, it's so hard. I don't want to downplay the challenges of suffering. But yeah, we are cutting ourselves out of the healing by hiding it and by trying to anesthetize our souls, basically, as well as our bodies, I think. And yeah, so I think that the more our church can do to show, that's what I'm trying to do with my caskets, with the prayers carved in the side. I want people to have a very personal encounter with the faith of a person. If you want to know who the person is who died, you have to know them in the context of their relationship to God. It puts the story in perspective of every human life. If somebody was saintly, you say, yeah, this is why. And if somebody struggled, you say, okay, there's hope. You still contextualizes things. So I think that our church has the answer to a universal, inescapable, absolute, truth that everyone has to wrestle with. And so we need to share that answer.
We got an email. Kenneth from Auburn writes, what are your reflections on how a Christian, particularly a Catholic, should think about and prepare for death? As age creeps up on us, many people seem to see the end of our lives as something to be feared.
Well, I think familiarity, I went to Dunkin' Donuts instead of going to CCD class, so my eyes glaze over sometimes on theological questions, if there's any of that. But the more we can become familiar with where we're going, I had to cross through the desert of the Middle East to get to Madonna House. Our forebears had to cross through the desert to get to the Promised Land. We can't escape the desert, and that's what death is. It's a stripping of everything. It's a detachment from everything that we've built our lives around, most of us. So the more we can detach from this life by prayer and fasting, and the more we can reconcile with the people around us, because I find that seems like that's a lot of what people are, the anxiety comes from, is the fear of going into the unknown and going into it in a way that you're not prepared for. So we can basically visit our destiny by just detaching from this world and forgiving the people around us.
When you hear about a young person dying, and I remember when I was a pastor doing funerals, it was always the hardest to do one when a young person dies. But there's a sense in which that young person was robbed of their life. Mm-hmm. And the truth is that we're not guaranteed anything.
No.
There's no guarantee of a long life. A short life, whatever life, is a gift. And so the gathering of a funeral is a reminder that every day is a gift.
Yeah. The funeral is a great opportunity to have you reminded of that. And not only are we not guaranteed that we have a long life, we're not guaranteed that we'll be on the right path during that life. So it's so hard to see. It's a paradox, of course, that we have to go through death to get to life.
Carla from Cedar Rapids, right? What does Mr. Daly find most rewarding about his work?
Well, on a natural level, that my family's a part of it, that my wife helps me out with lining the caskets when she's not attending to more urgent matters, and that my children are getting the opportunity to use a saw here and there. But on a deeper level, or on a supernatural level, it's just I'm developing relationships with people that are meaningful, even if they're very short. I enter into a life of somebody when they're dealing with this ultimate question, and I get to really connect with them when all the other stuff is put aside. And so I see the biographies. I get to know just the incredible. As St. Thomas Aquinas said, that the one human soul is more important to God than the entire created material universe. Now, abstractly, that could just sound like a nice thing to say, but when you realize just the richness of a person's life and how they affected others and their joys and their sorrows, it just makes sense.
Yeah. And of course, the reminder through the caskets that you build of all this stuff, we don't take any of it with us.
Right.
It's the simplicity of this. And even as our present Pope chooses to live in a very simple apartment.
Yeah.
The choice of simplicity is really a call of our lives to choose to be like Christ, not only if it kind of happens. It's a choice.
Yeah, and he talks about a throwaway culture, and what could be worse than treating each other as throwaway items?
Yeah. All right. Well, that's his. Marcus's website is MarionCaskets.com. If you want to find out more about his work and his faith. Marcus, wonderful to have you on the
you
program.
so
It's too
much,
bad it
Marcus.
goes so quickly. I'd
Oh,
love to
it
find
was
out
quick. It's great to
more
hear.
about that. And but again, MarionCaskets.com in case the audience wants to find out more about it. Thank you for joining us. Of course, pray that Marcus's journey is an encouragement to you, but also, as he talked about, for a time to pause, think about life, think about death, think about our Lord and the promise he has for you. God bless you. See you next week.